Welcome to another episode of Witty CFB. Your host Rob Sheply here, and this week of college football has been definitely one of the most exciting. In the past couple weeks. I mean, you had Georgia and Texas, then you had Alabama and Tennessee that came down to the fourth quarter, and most importantly too, you had a couple upsets too. In particular, the one that's come to mind is Maryland knocking off USC 29-28 as USC blows a 14-point lead with, you know, Maryland blocking a kick, being able to take it down the field and ultimately win the game. And the reason this game has come to mind so much is there's been so much chatter, even as of last year too, in terms of talking about Lincoln Riley being one of the most overrated coaches in all of college football. And I figured, I did a preview of USC a couple months ago if you want to go check that out. But I figured, given the struggles that they've had, I felt it was fitting to talk about USC on this platform and also kind of talk about Lincoln Riley in terms of a whole, and most importantly, what USC kind of needs to do from here in order to be able to rectify this season and hopefully get to a bowl game. Now, let's start off with the positives first. I mean, yes, USC has blown some serious leads. We can look back and talk about Penn State, last week when you say to yourself, man, they got off to such a hot start. Me included was thinking to themselves, okay, another James Franklin choke job, and then all for Penn State to pretty much have a Jackal and Hyde in terms of a game, one of the shittiest, first two halves of the season they had, and they came back and Drew Aller was balling, and USC just simply had zero answers to Tyler Warren whatsoever. So when you put all that together, you know, it's understandable enough for USC to lose to Penn State. I mean, I for one thought Penn State, I even said it on here, I thought Penn State was going to win that game pretty comfortably. So for me to even sit there and say that it was, came down to the fourth quarter, much less a Penn State comeback, certainly was a little bit surprising too. And then when you think about the Minnesota and Maryland game, those games were also pretty close too. And when you put all this together right now, there's just a couple of things that come to mind. First and foremost, the biggest issue last year was obviously the defense being atrocious. The secondary giving up so many yards all the time, big explosive plays. I mean, he went as far to fire his defensive coordinator in the middle of the season. Obviously, that didn't really do anything. Then when you kind of shift to the offensive side of the ball, you know, one of the big criticisms that he's getting now is, oh, well, maybe since he had Caleb Williams, maybe he didn't reach a ceiling because he didn't win the Pac-12 because he kept losing to Utah in the Pac-12 title, and then now because USC was one of the catalysts to make the move from the now defunct Pac-12 into the Big Ten, you have to ask yourself too, Lincoln Riley is the guy for him in many ways. I mean, when he was at Oklahoma, he only lost 10 games in 5 seasons. So it's not like the guy wasn't a proven winner before. And I'd like to mention too. I mean, he is an excellent recruiter. I do think that USC has to go back a little bit more to the high school recruiting. I think before they were sort of trying to plug certain players in and rely a little bit more on the transfer portal. But I think even when you heard Riley's interview at the beginning of the season they played when they played Michigan, or no, it was LSU. Yeah, when they played them at the beginning of the season, you had to ask yourself to, how are they going to find that balance between, you know, capitalizing on the transfer portal as much as they can, but also, being able to really, hold down and, high school recruiting and elevate that as much as they can. I mean, as of right now, their 2025 recruiting class, according to 24/7 Sports, is ranked number 10 right now. And, USC's never necessarily had a difficulty recruiting in that regard because, Lincoln Riley knows how to sell this program. I mean, you're coming off the move to the Big Ten. You have a lot of history with the Coliseum being there. You can talk about the greats like you can talk about Pete Carroll. You can talk about Matt Leinart. You can talk about Reggie Bush and all those guys who who I remember watching on TV and being like, wow, this is one of the most electrifying, college football teams I've ever seen. So it goes to show that there is a lot of selling points for this USC team. And moving forward too, USC has a relatively manageable schedule, even though they're off to a 3-4 start, have 5 games left. I mean, when you look at this full circle, you have a Rutgers team who's lost their last three. Then you have Nebraska, who's coming off a pretty embarrassing loss versus Indiana, and more power to Indiana too. By the way, they definitely deserved that win, but it was just, I certainly for one was pretty shocked seeing how quickly and efficiently Indiana was able to move the ball in that Nebraska defense, especially covering on this program. How great of a defense they were, but obviously that young secondary was exploited significantly. But then you look forward and you have UCLA, who beat Rutgers 45-42 this weekend. So that should be a really good recovery win for them. You have a Washington team who's sort of in a rebuild right now. Jed Fish in his first year, and he's the Huskies are putting together some solid players, but it's still going to be a work in progress too. And then you finish off the year versus Notre Dame. So if you ask me, those 3 wins probably come from Rutgers, UCLA, and then either Nebraska or Washington. Because Notre Dame obviously had that loss versus Northern Illinois. That was a huge upset. But now that you have Riley Leonard into the fold, you're managing, having a little bit more of a balanced offense there. That definitely gives you a little bit more optimism in terms of Notre Dame being USC. But USC could definitely make that competitive, especially if they kind of clean up the errors that they've had over the past couple weeks too. And I'm sure there's always going to be people out there who are calling for, oh, well, Lincoln Riley's on the hot seat. Oh, he could get fired. Oh, this, that, or the other. I'm telling you right now, he's not going to get fired. He's not. They're not going to buy him out. That's crazy. Like even if they went, I think even if they went 6-6 this year, which to me would be the bare minimum expectation based on this schedule. I don't see them firing him. I mean, in terms of his contract, which is he is the highest paid Big Ten coach right now, even past Ryan Day, even past Dan Lanning and Kurt Signetti. But right now, his contract when he went to USC, which he signed 2.5 years ago, 10 years, $110 million, and the buyout is unknown because as many of you know, USC is a private school. But in terms of estimates, it's probably we're according to various reports, you're looking at probably somewhere in the vein of a Jimbo Fisher buyout, which is probably somewhere between 80 and $90 million approximately. So to me, if you ask yourself for $90 million, if I'm getting rid of Lincoln Riley, you better have somebody who is a quarterback is as good, if not better, quarterback guru than Lincoln Riley. You're gonna have to have somebody who can recruit just as well as him. You're gonna have to get somebody who can, finally address the defensive side of the ball and actually hire a coordinator who can completely run that himself. So that way he can primarily focus on sort of being a CEO head coach, which may as well be one of the reasons why USC is struggling as much. I mean, I'm not, Miller Moss obviously isn't a Heisman level type quarterback, but I think many coaches across the country would be very happy if you had Miller Moss. And you have a lot of talent. You have a really talented wide receiving core. You have a running attack that's I get kind of starting to get together, but everybody knows USC is primarily a passing attack, and sure, offensive line has been struggling a little bit you know getting getting Miller Moss enough protection and everything to really build some sustainable drives. But when I've looked at this team this past couple weeks, yes, are there struggles and all of that too, but a lot of it too, to me, really is coming down to execution. I mean, when you think about you think about those blocked kicks, you think about some of the questionable play calling, particularly on the defensive side of the ball, and it just seems like it's one of those situations where USC is just not closing out games. They're just putting their foot off the gas, especially when you're coming off a 14-point lead against Maryland in the fourth quarter. In my opinion, it's inexplicable and inexcusable to possibly lose that game. And nothing against Mike Locksley either. I mean, right now he's I think 37-33 at Maryland in his 6th year. Was at New Mexico back in 2009 and had a pretty much 3 atrocious seasons there before getting canned. But he has an extensive history with the Maryland program. and he took over really quite frankly in a really tough position. Not only when Randy Insell got fired in 2015, he was the interim coach before he, you know, bounced a few places and was Alabama's offensive coordinator, but also he took over the program right after DJ Duncan got fired for some of those bullying allegations that he had back after the 2018-2019 season. So pulling this full picture too. I mean, Maryland is a respectable program. They're not obviously anywhere near USC, but you know, moving forward, I think that a couple things you have to ask yourself if you're a USC fan. When we saw them play Michigan earlier in the season, I mean, you really thought that defense was a lot more respectable in many ways. I mean, you said to yourself, one of the main concerns that you have, or yeah, they played Michigan. Yeah, they actually did play Michigan and LSU. I'm conflating them both. But when you watch them play those games at the beginning of the season, I mean, you definitely, at least in my opinion, I certainly saw some strides. I mean, I'm not saying sitting there saying you know, it's done overnight, but they're certainly in a better position than they were last year. So I think that's number one. We need to continue building on that, really beefing up that front seven, getting some more pressure on these quarterbacks, and at least is getting really a legit number one corner where you can trust him to follow the top receiver, play some man coverage, especially in those really short third down situations, and finding ways to eliminate as much of those big gap plays as much as you can. So I think that's address number one. I think number two, by all accounts, I mean Lincoln Riley obviously is an offensive minded coach, and it is possible too that maybe he has to take more of a sort of CEO direction where maybe he has to delegate some more of the offensive responsibilities to somebody on a staff or bring somebody in who can kind of run Lincoln's offense and do all of that too. I mean, you know, there's probably a couple of guys that come to mind if you sit down and think about it, which we don't have time to do on this episode right now. But you know, there's a reason why USC gave him $110 million. I mean, the track record's there, and is he an overrated coach as of right now? Yeah, I'd say I think it's fair to say as of right now he's a tad bit overrated and definitely has exceeded expectations in terms of the Big Ten move. However, when you look at this moving forward, I think the biggest thing you have to kind of keep in mind to yourself is probably the most immediate goal to yourself is saying, "Hey, let's make sure that we're keeping the commits that we have to assure we have a top 10 class coming in. Let's really make sure we're maximizing, as much as we can of Miller Moss and his skill set. And you have so many, really high quality receivers who can break tackles, can get yards after catch, who are elusive and great route runners. And then also too, how can you just clean up this defense just little by little too, so you're not in this situation where every week you're scrambling in the fourth quarter. And obviously the pressure is going to be on Lincoln Riley to put this together. However, when you look at this team full picture, I mean, right now 33-12 is USC's head coach, and obviously the expectations are certainly not what we thought they were. But when you look at this full circle, there are a lot of foundational pieces that you can put together. You have a pretty solid, you definitely have a lot of winnable games coming up that definitely could see the pendulum shifting, especially if you can knock off Rutgers, Nebraska, and UCLA to get a nice 3-game win streak going into Washington would certainly help. I mean, at the bare minimum, bowl game has to be an expectation right now. But if you're a USC fan, are you definitely a little nervous about what you've seen? Absolutely. But at the same time, too, you know, we're only go. It's really about to complete his third year as USC's head coach, and it's definitely going to be one of the big storylines heading into the rest of the season in terms of how much USC and Lincoln Riley can turn this season around.